it's Emily bringing you another Grass River microclass. And because it is mid-July already and we're really getting into the thick of summer, summer always reminds me, and many of you probably, of sitting around a campfire with friends and family. So I wanted to do something a little bit different today, something that relates a little bit more to survival skills, but still very, has a great foundation in natural history knowledge, as opposed to just the more science-based, ID-based things that we normally do on these micro classes. So today we are going to learn how to make fire by friction with using a bow drill, or some people call the kit a bow and drill, this system. And I'll show you the different parts of the kit, the different types of equipment that we need, how to make them, and then hopefully we'll actually make a coal. And I really wanted to do this because, yeah, it's a survival skill, and are any of us or most of us ever going to actually need to be able to quick, I'm dying of hypothermia, I need to make a fire in the woods? Probably not. Hopefully not. But it's a different way to engage with the natural materials. It's just a different way to connect with different types of wood, different trees, and it's just a different way to appreciate nature and all of the resources that it provides us with. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about what we have in our bow drill kit, what we're gonna need in order to make fire by friction. So I think the easiest way to do this is for me to show you guys exactly how all these pieces fit together when you're doing the actual thing, and then we'll talk about each of the pieces individually. So I'm gonna twist what's called a spindle into my bow here, into the bowstring. I'm gonna put the spindle on what's called the fireboard in one of the pre-made holes in there that I've already carved. And then I'm gonna hold the spindle with this hand hold, and the spindle top is gonna fit right into this hole I've already burned into the hand hold. And then what I'm gonna do is just use the bow string to spin the spindle in its hole on the fireboard, like that. All right, so let's talk about the bow first. So any type of wood, doesn't need to be any sort of, particular species. Any type of wood will work. I don't even know what species this is because I picked this stick up off the forest floor and already had its bark off of it. So I don't even know what it is. But it does help to have a little branch coming off, which is good to tie your cord on there. But if you don't have a little branch coming off, you can just carve a slit in there and secure the rope like that. But you just want it to be about arm's length, and you want it to have a nice curve to it so that the string is held as far away from the stick as possible, because you're going to need room for that spindle to move along. Okay, and then the cord, I just use paracord, but you can use any sort of just strong string. You can even make your own natural cordage using the inner bark of basswood or stinging nettle, but that would be a whole different class. So I just use paracord. No special knots are needed. I just use square knots, which are just the regular kind of knots. So that's your bow. All right, let's talk about spindles. So here's where different species of trees come into play. Both for spindles and fireboards, cedar is great. One, because it smells awesome when it starts to heat up, but two, and more importantly, because it's a really soft wood. And so what you are doing here is when the spindle is fitting into this hole in the fireboard and we're pressing down with our handhold and we're spinning it, we're really wearing off tiny, tiny shavings of wood. We're grinding down into the hole, and those tiny shavings are collecting in this notch that we carve right here. So we do want a wood that is soft, so that it's easy to get those shavings. So both the fireboard and the spindle are going to be soft wood. Cedar's great, but you can use other things too, like any aspen or poplar or basswood even. And spindles, as far as size, usually they're about the diameter of your thumb. I like skinny spindles because you can get more rotations of them with just like one stroke of the bow. So it spins faster. So it's easier, doesn't require like maybe as much strength, but then you're having less surface pushed down on the fireboard. So less dust coming off. So, you know, there are trade-offs and you just got to figure out what you like. And I should say, these are really short spindles. They've definitely been ground down over time a lot. It's about time for me to get some new spindles. You want them, you know, to be about this tall. Because the shorter it is, the harder it is to keep the string of the bow between the fireboard and the handhold. You have a shorter distance there. Okay, so fireboard, you want to be, I don't know, anywhere from like 3/8 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch thick. And softwood, that's really all there is to a fireboard. It's really easy to make one. You just shave off like a log of, you just bill it off like a log of cedar. So then your handhold is a different story from your spindle and your fireboard. This you want to be really hard wood. So things like maple and oak are really good for your handhold because you do not want your spindle to grind down up into the handhold and eventually start grinding on your hand, right? You want your handhold to last for a really long time. So hardwoods, or even stone or ceramics work well if you can find one with the perfect little socket in it. And then the last thing that I don't even have an example of here because I usually just pick one up off the ground is a coal catcher. So I usually use just like a big leaf, or you can use like a square of birch bark, anything that you can set under your fireboard that basically when, you know, your coal starts smoking, and you know, you've got a coal, anything that you can then transfer from below your fireboard, from the ground, into your tinder bundle, which is what you're gonna like blow on the coal in, and so the tinder bundle, you know, bursts into flames, and then you put it in your fire structure, your little teepee or log cabin that you've already built. So a coal catcher basically is just a way to transfer the coal because you don't want to be making the coal on the ground and then like, yes, I got a coal, it's awesome. I have no way to get it and put it into my tinder bundle because it's hot. Can't touch it. All right. So those are the pieces of our bow drill kit. Now let's learn technique and how to put them all together. Okay, so first things first, you found a stick, you tied a string, a tight string onto it, either by, you know, wrapping it around a branch or cutting a slit into it. You've got your bow. Okay. Next you found a chunk of cedar, dry, really dry cedar, not fresh cedar. It needs time to dry out, and you kind of billeted off a nice rectangular fireboard and a little triangle maybe, and you carved it so it's nice and round, no like edges that are gonna catch on your fireboard when it's spinning. So nice and round spindle, straight, no bends because that makes it wobble. Okay, and you found a nice chunk of hardwood. So here's what we're gonna do. So the very first thing you would do if you were starting fresh is you would take a knife very carefully, and I like using Morin knives, but any sort of like carving knife is fine, any single blade knife is fine. So what I would do is you want the hole, if I take my spindle and I measure it, I would want the hole that I'm going to start with the knife, I would want the hole to be really close to the edge, but not at the edge quite, because I want to have room to be able to carve a notch in there, and I do not want my spindle slipping out of the hole because the hole is too close to the edge. So what I would do is I would just take my knife and I would just take the tip of my knife and carve sort of a little hole in there, just kind of grind it out. Like that. And then I would take my spindle and I would basically burn a new hole in. So I wrap my spindle in the string, and the way I do this is I put the spindle on the outside and then just one twist in. It should be pretty hard to get the spindle in, because you want it to be tight in there. All right, and see how I put my spindle in so it's on the outside? That just gives me that much more room for the spindle to travel along the bow, as opposed to if the spindle was wrapped on the inside of the string, it wouldn't allow me to go as far with my strokes on either end. Okay, so then I would put my spindle tip, and ideally it's carved a little bit more into a pointed tip. So when you're burning it in, so that it really sits in there, and then you just spin it back and forth so you start to burn in a new hole. And then once your hole is, deep enough where your spindle is not going to spin out, is not going to flip out, that's when you carve your notch, and you're basically literally just carving a notch. It's like a pizza slice, and the tip of the pizza slice should be almost to the center of the notch, because that's of the center of the hole, because that's the lowest point, right? And you want all that dust to collect in this notch right here. So once you have a new hole and you've got a notch, and you've made a hole and kind of burned in a hole by spinning in the top of your handhold, you're good to go. So the way we do this, first you sheath your knife back up, because you're never going to leave that knife unsheathed on the ground when you're not using it. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to have the bow in my right hand, and I just have this dish towel here, by the way, because it hurts my knees to lean on the rocky soil for a long time. So you can use a dish towel or a shirt or whatever, or if you're on soft pine needles, that is perfect. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my left foot on the fireboard just to hold it down. And then I'm gonna put my spindle in there, like we talked about, and I'm gonna fit my spindle into, don't want that on the dish towel though. I'm going to fit my spindle into the hole, and then with my left hand, I'm going to hold this spindle down with the handhold. And then I'm just gonna pull, and you wanna do long, nice, steady strokes. And see how my left hand is kind of anchored, it's touching, it's stabilized by my left shin here. Because you don't want it just free floating, because then, it's harder to stabilize it. It starts to wobble around, and then that's when your spindle goes flying across the yard. So it's nice and stabilized there, and I'm just gonna pull and push, pull and push. And it's good to start slowly until you kind of work up a rhythm. And it's normal for it to squeak. You want as long and even of strokes as possible. I'm not doing a very good job with that right now. Long, even strokes. So that's basically the technique. It's pretty easy. And then, some tips are, so my spindle is getting really black on the end, which means it's kind of it almost feels like glass, it's kind of hard. So what I would do is take my knife at this point and kind of carve off that really hardened part to expose the fresh wood underneath, because I do want the fresh soft wood to be exposed so that I can get as many shavings as possible. So if I were to be cranking on my bow for long enough, eventually this notch here would fill up with coal or with dust from the wood that's coming off of my spindle and my fireboard in these little tiny shavings that look like dust. And from the heat of the friction, the spindle spinning, eventually it gets hot enough that all that tiny dust turns into a tiny, mini coal. So let's see if we can actually make this happen, shall we? there's the coal right there, that orange glowing thing, and that's what you would transfer then on this coal catcher, this maple leaf, and put in your tinder bundle to blow into flame. All right, folks, there you have it. I don't normally get it that quickly. Usually takes some effort and some sweat for sure. So again, I am not an expert at all on this, but if you do have any questions, let me know. It's just a great way it's a different way to connect with the natural world and to be reminded of how much the natural world provides for us as humans. So with that, I will see you guys next week, and hopefully you have a great week. Bye, everybody.